It's February. The NBA trade deadline is in 1 week. What do the Pacers need to consider after making their big move earlier this month? What are all the things that could be coming for them this week? Who better to talk about that than ESPN front office insider and former Nets executive Bobby Marks? We'll get to all of it today on the Locked On Pacers podcast.
You are Locked On Pacers, your daily Indiana Pacers podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Your team every day.
What up, y'all? Happy Thursday, and welcome into another edition of the Locked On Pacers podcast, where we, of course, talk about the Indiana Pacers. As always, my name's Tony East. I cover the team for Forbes and SI, and today, really fun show coming. It's February. It's trade deadline month. It's Thursday. The trade deadline's in exactly a week. So that is, of course, the topic of the day. And who better to dive into the trade deadline with than ESPN front office insider and former Nets executive Bobby Marks. We get into everything. How the Pascal Siakam trade changes how the Pacers had to think about their team and their moves. They have more expectations now. They have more urgency to win now. What's that going to look like? We talk about the expiring contracts, what the Pacers need to think about with guys who could be free agents this summer, their second-round picks, what those could mean, their crowded front court, all sorts of key topics heading into the deadline. Bobby's insight, so appreciated. He's been there, done that, and knows this stuff like the back of his hand. Really fun podcast. You will learn a lot today. Let's just dive right in with ESPN's Bobby Marks. We've got ESPN front office insider, former Nets front office personnel leader. I don't know if you have so many jobs, what you prefer from your Nets days. It's Bobby Marks here to talk Pacers ahead of the trade deadline. February right around the corner. Bobby, how are you? Are you keeping your head above water with the many things going on around the league these days?
You know, this is one of those times where I wished I lived on the West Coast, right? Because of the, the last thing you want to do is wake up at like 2 a.m. and then have like a trade notification and you've missed what has happened. Fortunately, there hasn't been, outside of, certainly the Pascal trade, which happened kind of around lunchtime. And OG was right around New Year's Eve. We have not had any of those middle of the night, the James Harden type trades that we saw back in October 31st / November 1st here. So, but we'll probably get active. As you know, everybody kind of reacts a little bit differently when there's a deadline that you're faced with, and certainly how some of these new rules are going to have effect, where it's kind of like, a lot of these teams are like in this use it or lose it when you've got cash to send or trade exceptions to use and all that. And certainly losing doesn't help either. Losing, that's why I always say it's in season trades, there's a little more pressure because in the off season, everybody loves their roster. And in season, you just lost by 20 the night before, and you're like, oh my God, I need to go out and get a point guard now and stuff like that. So, but yeah, looking forward to the deadline on February 8th.
I'll never forget being in Illinois for a family 4th of July event, and the 3 a.m. Kawhi Leonard trade notification when the Clippers night was crazy. If I was in LA for that, it would have been a lot better.
Yeah, I mean, we were in Bristol. Woj and I were in Bristol for that, and God, I pulled an all-nighter. I hadn't pulled an all-nighter since college. And as far as that was, that summer of 19 with Durant and Irving going to Brooklyn, and then Kawhi trade, Kawhi signing, Paul George trade. That was waiting for Kawhi. It was a crazy. Certainly a crazy offseason.
Unusual waiting for anybody these days. So you have been a part of a front office that made significant trades, obviously, and with the name of upgrades in mind. The Pacers just did that, right? Siakam is now on their team. They have different goals now. So when you make a trade like that in a front office and it changes your immediate direction, how long does it take for your kind of thinking to change and catch up on okay, here's what our roster looks like now within the structure and goals that we have versus what we had even 3 weeks ago?
Yeah, it's funny. Indiana went from this cap space team flexibility wise, and now all of a sudden we've got to worry about the luxury tax next year, right?
Right.
And I was there in New Jersey. We went through the same thing. 10-11 season, we got all this flexibility, cap space, draft picks, and then we go get Darren Williams. And then all of a sudden you're like, well, wait a minute. Now we might be a luxury tax team down the road. And it changes kind of your thinking as far as how the pieces fit. Certainly with Indiana, who go out and get Pascal, as a free agent, likelihood it will come in at a pretty significant number, and then you add that with Tyrese's rookie extension kicking in. Now you've got like your two top heavy guys, right? Your two main guys, and I think that's how this new CBA is setting it up, where you have like two max type guys, and then everyone else kind of filters in. Now what it does is now in a team raised this brought this up to me. It's like, in the back of the old days, you would just have to go into Kevin Pritchard's office and say, KP, this deal is going to cost us $25 million in luxury tax penalties, right? And now it's like, okay, it's going to cost us the tax, but how does it impact the first apron? How does it impact the second apron? How does it impact the there's all these different kind of ramifications. How does it impact us bringing back Obi Toppin, who's a restricted free agent, or Buddy Hield, or do we maybe look to move off one of those guys before February 8th? And because of where your finances are, that it is, as I said, like you go from, having $30 million in potential cap space to now you've got $150 million in salary and a luxury tax at 172. And you're looking at all these options here. The beauty of it is, and I've talked to a lot of teams about this, is like, one of my big questions is what's the perfect roster under this new collective bargaining agreement? Like, what's the perfect way to build it? And we're going to learn a lot, but a lot of people have said Indiana, what they've done, because I know the picks went out to Toronto in that deal, but how they have the Aaron Naismith extension. It's a really good number. You still have Mathurin. You still have Isaiah Jackson, some of your younger players, Nemhard, some of your younger players, and then Myles is the third highest guy at $20 million. There's a structure there where it's not like Phoenix is tough because you have 3 max guys and 10 minimums. Like that's when you run into that danger zone a little bit here, because you're basically turning over your roster every year and everything like that. So there's a lot of different decisions there as far as what Indiana is faced with. But as you said, like it goes from kind of that cap space to now we're a team that's, hey, we're 23 million below the tax next year. How we have to prioritize who our free agents are.
Would it be strange too if, the trade was January 19th, 18th, whatever it was officially, that, now they're thinking about winning this year. Whereas before the season, Chad Buchanan said, we have this long-term part in the back of our head. So now you have 3 weeks, basically, a little over 3 weeks until the deadline itself to evaluate your new rotation, your new team within winning goals. Like, do you feel like that's any sort of challenge, or do you feel like they already have enough data on their current team to assess that part of it? Yeah,
I mean, it changes the goalpost a little bit here. I mean, I think the big thing is that, you'd love to see this roster healthy, and healthy, what I mean is, Haliburton at full strength. Right. I think he's still kind of trying to come back and figure out, from that injury here. I think, it's amazing, because I was just talking to Tim Bontemps about this here, and you guys are going to be talking a lot about it, is the 65 game.
Yep. Rule. Already are. Yeah.
Yeah. And the one thing you don't want, and he's different than Embiid. Like the Haliburton situation is different than Embiid, where Embiid had won the MVP already, right? Haliburton's got an extra $40 million as far as where, what's riding as far as him getting that 65 games and everything like that. And so it does change the goalpost, because you were that team that was kind of, fighting to get in, as a 6 seed and stuff like that. Now we go out and trade 3 first-round picks, and now we're expected to try to get into that 4 or 5, or maybe avoid the play-in and everything like that. But I think the trade is set up more for next year also, and future years here, because those in-season trades are extremely hard to make and have a significant impact, where it is taking you kind of to a Eastern Conference championship or an NBA, an NBA finals.
Hey guys, short little break here. Have to talk to you about the lovely people over at PrizePicks, the largest daily fantasy sports platform in North America, where it's simple what you do. You pick more than or less than on 2 to 6 player stat projections and watch your winnings roll in, for example, Steph Curry, more than or less than 29 points. Nikola Jokic, more than or less than 10 rebounds. You can do that for 2 to 6 players with similar lines to that every night. It's an absolute blast. You can do their specials leagues for a little while longer with their combo football basketball leagues. For example, a combo of Travis Kelce plus LeBron James at 10.5 3-pointers made plus receptions. You can play alongside their celebrity players like rapper Meek Mill and comedian Andrew Schultz. And they have a reboot policy. So if your players get hurt, you can stay in the game. You've got to check it out. Go to prizepicks.com/LockedOnNBA and use the code LockedOnNBA for a first deposit match up to $100. Again, that's prizepicks.com/LockedOnNBA with the code LockedOnNBA for a first deposit match up to $100 at PrizePicks Daily Fantasy Sports made easy. Pacers are in an interesting spot to me right now where, they have 2 expirings, but one of them is a restricted guy, and the other one's Buddy Hield, who clearly they wanted to extend him before the season, even though it ended before the season, but it ended up being what it is now. What do you feel like are the big things for them heading into the deadline now that they've made the Siakam trade? Is it the Toppin Hield expirings? Is it something with their kind of crowded front court? What stands out to you as their next big thing they have to think about?
Yeah, I mean, Toppin's a little bit different because, as you said, he's restricted, right? So you've got the right to match. You basically control restricted free agency unless he comes in with an offer sheet, and then you're forced to make a decision there. Hield, I think Hield is, and there's a balancing act with Buddy, and I wrote about it, is that what are you selling to your locker room if you're saying we're trading Buddy Hield for a first-round pick, where you have a guy that maybe can help you in a playoff game, but we're going to pick up a draft asset here because we think we're going to lose. And I'm just looking back to when didn't sit well with Pacers fans when Danny Granger got traded for Evan Turner, and that kind of like just the locker room dynamics, because there is more than just we're trading an expiring because we don't want to pay him or the luxury tax, but there's that locker room dynamic there that maybe you don't do anything with either. And maybe you just go into the offseason here, because you could always do a sign and trade. You could always do something where, maybe you're trading him and creating a trade exception here in that regards. And you're picking up a couple second rounds. And you don't have to do anything, just because they're going to, potentially become free agents there.
Yeah, with Hield, I have a couple things that I wonder. One is, if they do a trade like you just described, the value has to be high enough that they say this is worth us being worse in a year that we want to make the postseason or have talked about making the postseason. And so it doesn't have to be trading Buddy Hield for equal value. It has to be trading him for enough value to also lose that part of it, which on a team like this, where everybody's talked about making the postseason all year, is a tricky message to send. And the other thing with him that I've thought about is, his salary slot's now kind of important in the new CBA. You kind of described this stuff. So losing him is kind of painful, right? You need those $20 million guys around. So, but also trading him for a long-term salary, you run into tax concerns. So it's a kind of a tricky balance. And with Toppin, the other thing I wondered is, he doesn't meet starter criteria. So his qualifying offer isn't super high, but like, he might just sign it, right? given the Pacers situation. So how does that all fit into what they think of him this summer? It's only like a little under $8 million if he doesn't make starter criteria. But even that with their luxury tax bill is something to think about. So while I agree they could keep Toppin easily, and go ahead.
I think, Tony, the luxury tax, and a team brought this up to me, is not going to be as important as it once was because the rates are going down. And I know it's important to get the distribution as far as where that is. And I think the distribution will get lower as this apron kind of takes a bite out of Golden State and the Clippers, and their tax figures come down. And in 2 years from now, you're basically looking like, dollar for dollar if you get in. I would have loved to seen, that you get in and then you still get some type of distribution back. I thought that would have been smart as far as allow teams to spend more. So I think the tax, although it is, you don't want to be a tax paying team, doesn't have as much bite as it maybe did in the past. So you can dip your toe in there. I think you made up a good point about in this new CBA with those salary slots, those like $15 to $20 million guys are extremely, extremely valuable. We're seeing it right now where, you can make an argument that Bruce Brown and Malcolm Brogdon and all those guys who are making $20 million are more valuable than Zach LaVine. That's just
really seems that way. Yeah.
It's just the reality of it. And like New York's going to go through it with Fournier. Like Evan Fournier is more valuable than Zach LaVine. And people are like, wait a minute, guy averages 3 minutes. No, he's got an $18.9 million contract. He's got a $19 million team option for next year. And he fits if you want to go out and make another deal, right? Like if you want to take his contract and aggravate it or flip it for something else, those are the type of deals or contracts that you want to have.
Yeah, and the other thing I think for the Pacers that could be appealing, if they could find a way to do it, this is obviously fantasy land, is one of those nice mid-20s descending contracts. Look at Bogdan Bogdanović. That is, I think every team should be calling the Hawks and their financial situation about him. But, of course, PJ Washington, similarly, that's fantasy land to acquire a player just for their contract. But that is, in the Pacers situation, something that would be appealing. So I agree with you that Toppin and Hield are interesting names to monitor, but I also agree that keeping them for the rest of the season, figuring out in June and July could be interesting. And something that hasn't really been discussed as it relates to the trade deadline, and I don't think it's a big deal, but now teams can negotiate with their own guys before everybody else. Do you feel like that's going to change anything when free agency starts the day after the finals, or not that much?
No, probably not. I just think it makes it cleaner, right?
Yeah,
I just think it makes it cleaner where you're not hiding in the bushes anymore. I think it just opens up the dialogue where maybe it eliminates maybe some of these other teams that have kind of trying to figure out what the marketplace is, and you're going back channels here. And if you're Buddy or Obi and you're on the roster in the offseason and the finals ends on June 16th, you have basically a 2-week window to figure out kind of what your marketplace is going to be. But a lot of that, as a lot of that stuff happens kind of around. You find a guy down in the coffee shop in Chicago, and you start talking about Buddy Hield as far as what his what his number could be. But I think certainly the marketplace dictates that as far as where teams are with cap space and who's got exceptions. I think what will be interesting for Toppin is that the rules are changing where you can acquire players by using your exceptions. So if you got the $13 million non-tax, it's almost like it's a trade exception for you. I mean, there's different ramifications for it because it will trigger, whether it be the first apron there. And how does that impact free agency? How does that impact free agency if teams are just sitting there saying, you know what, we're going to wait for a trade to happen. We're going to use our exceptions towards that and not towards a free agent.
I wonder if his qualifying offer fits in the non-tax or the regular tax mid-level. I'd have to double check. That's probably
not, because that thing's low.
One more break here, guys, so we can talk about the lovely folks over at FanDuel. Happy Super Bowl to all who celebrate. The big game is getting close, and FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook, is the way to go. If you are like me, you're going to be on Super Bowl Sunday, sitting on the couch, grabbing your favorite football snacks, hanging out with your friends, and for some of you, that will include placing some super bets on FanDuel. They have so many ways for you to end your season with a W. 2, 3, 4 W's, however many you're getting into. Not only can you bet on who will win Super Bowl 58, but FanDuel also has bets for which players will score a touchdown or how many total points will be scored, and so much more. New customers join today on FanDuel. You'll get $200 in bonus bets if your first bet of $5 or more wins. How about that? $200 in bonus bets. But for that offer, you got to go to FanDuel.com/lockedon and sign up. That's FanDuel.com/lockedon. Make every moment more with FanDuel, an official sportsbook of the NFL. So something else I'm curious about with the Pacers, and I'm curious about your thoughts on, is now that they have Siakam, they went from a team with maybe one too many guards to now they have probably one too many frontcourt players, right? If fully healthy, Siakam, Nesmith, Turner, Obi, and Jalen Smith would probably be the guys that play there. And that leaves Isaiah Jackson and Jarris Walker presently out. And I get why Jarris Walker can still have long-term value, whatever. But Isaiah Jackson, you mentioned him earlier, is a good young player. On one hand, with young players, the team that has them puts the most value in them because they've developed them, they've made decisions with them in mind. But on the other hand, if they're not playing, their value is less to you now. How would you kind of think about that as the Pacers?
Young players like that are like, I'm going to use a baseball analogy. They're like middle relief pitchers. They're the guys that come in 6th or 7th inning that gets you like 2 outs when you need it, right? But you might not use them for another week. And that's kind of that's like situational because they're on such a good contract, they're on rookie contracts. Isaiah's at 2.7, right? 2.2% of the cap and stuff like that. But then what happens though is that all of a sudden you look up and you're like, oh, wait a minute, he's going into his 4th year of his contract. We've got to figure out what to do with him. And as you said, you're certainly not going to do anything with Walker because he fits. If your salaries get to be high, he's one of those guys where you've got these, like Mathurin, right? You're on these great contracts. It fits kind of the ecosystem of the salary cap here. But yeah, I mean, I think if something would make sense, if a team comes in and offers something and it makes sense, and if you can maybe build back your draft equity a little bit there, then that's something that you can certainly look at.
I'm sure my listeners are dying to know the answer to this question, but they now have 3 second-round picks in the 50s and might not even have 3 roster slots. Do you even think about that as a trade deadline thing that matters for them to consider?
Well, here's the thing, though, because what you're going to see is there's a third of the league is going to be apron teams potentially.
They want those.
Yeah. So, there goes the cash, right? No more cash in a deal if you're a second apron team here. So, those turn into maybe your 2-way guys. Maybe it's going to be maybe less activity that we've maybe seen in the second round just based on what these new rules are.
These are dramatic picks now, Bobby. They get their own day of coverage. They get 4 minutes per pick. These are a big deal.
I know. I just saw that. Second day of the NBA draft, right? We can focus. That'll be a big day about focusing in on the Pacers there in the 50s.
That's their day. Is there anything else you feel like we haven't touched on with the Pacers? The only thing I feel like we haven't mentioned is Hield would still be extension eligible if he isn't traded, but that's only with the Pacers. But I mean, who knows where they're at with that? But is there any other consideration you feel like this team needs to have this next week or so?
Listen, before the trade, I thought there was a lot of talk about TJ as far as his value. I mean, TJ's got a lot of value to the Pacers. He's got one of the great contracts, right? He's like, when we talk about Alex Caruso contract, he's, that's where you got a partial for next year, and he fills a role, and he's, he fits what Rick is trying to do here. So guys like that are invaluable to what you're doing here. But yeah, I mean, I'm just looking at their cap sheet here right now. It's a deep roster. I think you've seen a lot more of Ben Shepherd a little bit lately. And people probably think, was that a sign that maybe they're phasing out Heel? I don't know. I don't think so. But I think it's you're kind of as you said, you're kind of in this in between phase where you made a big deal, a big trade. It changes the goalposts a little bit around. You go from like that expectation of like what's next to now now we have to take another, getting into the first round might not be good enough, or maybe it is based on how that series goes here. But the beauty of it is that because you did that deal, I guess it was 2 or 3 weeks ago, you're not faced with 20 games left in the season. Like you still have, there's, with Haliburton back and getting him healthy, you still have kind of a little bit of a longer runway than you would have done at the deadline.
Yeah, McConnell, big winner from the Siakam trade because Bruce Brown went out, right? So now he has minutes, and credit to his agent for doing this 4 years ago, but his partial is so high that you don't have to decide if he's worth $9 million. You have to decide if he's worth $4.3 million, and obviously he is, so I assume that would get picked up, although flexibility could be valuable to some teams. So he seems like a big winner from all this to me. And I think that outside of the expirings and maybe a small front court trade, the Pacers might just see what they've got with this team and figure out, okay, let's see what we are in the postseason. And it's easier to assess what you need to be better in the playoffs with playoff experience. So that's a big part of it.
Yeah. I mean, that's it. And I just did a video on the Kings. And I said that and it's kind of like somewhat similar situation, maybe where Sacramento was. The one thing you don't want to do is make a deal. And then all of a sudden you're like, oh my God, now we're a playing team, or now we're fighting to get in.
Right.
A mid-season deal here where, let's get to the playoffs. Let's get to a first round series. Let's see where we are. Similar to like Oklahoma City. Well, Oklahoma City could go through where this group as together, getting in a first round series. You know what? Maybe we need to go at it and get another guard or we need more shooting and stuff like that. And then you can go about and address that in the off season.
Bobby, invaluable insight into this Pacers team and the league's happenings. Thank you very much for the time today. Most people probably know already, but where can people keep up with the stuff you're putting on about all 30 teams heading into the
Yeah, we've got, I think, 18 trade guide videos up on YouTube on the ESPN section. We've got full content on ESPN.com. Trade guides, 2 trade guides, short novels, as I call them, as far as what's out there. And we'll have more content over the next week.
Invaluable resources. I missed watching Bobby Marks' Instagram videos about random trades now. They've migrated.
Yeah, I've become big time. I finally have figured out technology and stuff as far as as far as putting a 3-minute video on my Instagram page and stuff like that.
Bobby's on Twitter at BobbyMarks42. You can find this show at Locked On Pacers and me at Tony R. East. Tomorrow, talking Pacers Knicks, talking Pacers Kings, all sorts of fun game stuff, and there'll be a lot of trade coverage heading into the deadline. Thanks, everybody, and we'll see you soon.